Hello everyone, my name is Michael. For 40 years I worked as a structural engineer, designing bridges and buildings, things meant to last, things built on solid foundations. I always believed that a family, much like a skyscraper, needed that same kind of strong, unwavering support to thrive. I spent a good portion of my retirement making sure my daughter's family had that support. But then, one evening, over a dinner that was meant to be a celebration, I learned that sometimes the foundations you build for others are the very things they take for granted the most. What started as a joke, a casual jab at my expense, quickly spiraled into a moment that would change all of our lives forever. Before I tell you what happened, and believe me, you're going to want to hear this, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It's always nice to know who I'm sharing my story with. It all came to a head at my daughter Jessica's house. The table was set with the good china, the one my late wife, Helen, had helped her pick out. Candles were flickering, casting a warm glow on everyone's faces. We were there to celebrate my son-in-law, Greg's latest promotion. He'd just been made a senior vice president at his marketing firm, and, to hear him tell it, he was now single-handedly steering the entire company toward greatness. He held up his wine glass, a deep, expensive red that I'd brought as a gift, and swirled it with an air of practiced importance. "You know, Michael," he began, a smirk playing on his lips, "retirement must be relaxing. All that free time, no real pressure, no deadlines. What's it like designing birdhouses after a career of designing skyscrapers? Must feel like a big step down." A few nervous chuckles went around the table. My daughter, Jessica, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Greg, be nice. Dad had a wonderful career. He built things that are still part of the city's skyline." "Oh, I know," he waved a dismissive hand. "Ancient history. But let's be real. The world is different now. It's a young man's game. It takes a certain kind of drive to really succeed in today's market." He puffed out his chest, the picture of self-satisfaction. I just took a careful sip of water, keeping my expression neutral. I had learned long ago that engaging with Greg when he was in one of these moods was like wrestling with a pig in mud. You both get dirty, and the pig likes it. My granddaughter, 9-year-old Lily, chimed in, always my little defender. "Grandpa built my dollhouse. It has real working windows." Greg patted her on the head, a condescending gesture that always rubbed me the wrong way. "That's adorable, sweetie. But what Grandpa needs to understand is that in the real world, men provide for their families through their own grit and hard work. Not everyone gets to just coast on past achievements while others are out there carrying the weight." The silence that followed was heavy enough to feel. Jessica tried to fill it with a nervous laugh. "Maybe we should change the subject. Lily, why don't you tell Grandpa about your soccer game?" But Greg was on a roll, inflated by the wine and his own sense of importance. "Actually, I'd been doing some thinking," he announced to the table. "Now that I'm making real money, I mean serious money, Michael, it might be time for everyone in this family to start pulling their own weight." My heart sank. I knew exactly where this was going. For 15 years, ever since Helen passed, I had been the silent, invisible support system for their entire life. The mortgage on their sprawling 5-bedroom house, the lease on Greg's top-of-the-line German sedan, the tuition for the exclusive private school my grandchildren attended, it was all propped up by me. "Take Jessica, for instance," he continued, gesturing at my daughter with his wine glass. "She's been out of the workforce for, a decade? Living on, well, let's call it a family stipend. Maybe it's time she brushed off the old resume and rejoined the real world." Jessica's face went white. She knew better than anyone that their lifestyle, the designer clothes, the country club membership, the lavish vacations they posted all over social media, was a fantasy, a carefully constructed illusion funded entirely by my quiet monthly bank transfers. My grandson, 12-year-old Sam, sensed the tension. "Are we in trouble, Dad?" "No, son," Greg said, placing a hand on his shoulder.
but it's vital to understand the difference between earners and dependents, between those who provide and, he turned his gaze directly to me, letting the word hang in the air, those who have simply given up. The insult was so sharp, so direct, it felt like a physical blow. Jessica reached for her wine with a trembling hand. The children exchanged worried glances. Greg leaned forward, savoring what he clearly saw as his moment of triumph. He thought my silence was weakness, my composure a sign of defeat. "I don't mean to be cruel, Michael, but someone has to say it. When was the last time you truly contributed something meaningful? When did you last feel that satisfaction of earning your keep instead of just existing?" He paused, letting his words sink in, a smug grin spreading across his face. "So I'll ask you again, what's it like to be a loser?" The table went dead silent. Jessica gasped. Sam's fork clattered onto his plate. Lily's eyes welled up with tears. But I didn't get angry. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I took another slow, deliberate sip of water, placed the glass down with perfect stillness, and looked my son-in-law directly in the eyes. "It's an interesting question, Greg, but I have a better one for you. How does it feel to know that this loser will no longer be paying your bills?"
The color drained from Greg's face so fast, it was like watching a time-lapse video of a flower wilting. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. The children just stared, confused, as their father's triumphant expression crumbled into sheer, unadulterated panic. I calmly resumed eating my now cold steak, cutting each piece with the precision of an engineer designing a blueprint. The silence at the table was absolute. After a few more bites, I wiped my mouth with my napkin, folded it neatly, and stood up. I walked around the table and kissed Lily and Sam on their heads. "Thank you for dinner, Jessica," I said to my stunned daughter. "It was lovely." I walked to the front door, retrieved my coat, and stepped out into the cool night air, leaving behind a family teetering on the edge of a cliff they never even knew they were standing on. The drive home was quiet, but my mind was a whirlwind of activity. I wasn't angry, I was awakened. The fog of familial obligation had been burned away by the heat of Greg's insult. When I got home, I didn't pour a drink or turn on the television. I walked straight into my home office, a room that smelled of old books and oiled wood, and switched on my desk lamp. For an engineer, documentation is everything. For 15 years, I had documented my support with meticulous care. It was time to review the blueprints of their dependency. I pulled open the first of 3 filing cabinet drawers dedicated to them. The label read, Jessica and Greg, 2009 to 2014. Inside, the folders were color-coded, blue for the mortgage assistance, green for the auto loans, yellow for school expenses, red for club memberships and vacations. My wife Helen had passed in late 2008, and by the start of 2009, their financial struggles had begun. Greg had lost his job in the recession, and even after he found a new one, they were drowning. I remembered the phone call like it was yesterday. Jessica weeping, terrified they were going to lose the house. "Don't worry," I'd told her, my own heart aching with the fresh grief of losing my wife. "I'll help you get stable." Stable. That was the word I used, not permanent. I pulled out the first folder, Mortgage Assistance, a check for $3,500 in February 2009. Another in March, another in April. It soon became a monthly automatic transfer, a silent lifeline they quickly began to take for granted. I grabbed my calculator. $3,500 every single month for 180 months. The number that flashed on the screen was stark, $630,000, just for the house.
Next, the cars. Greg's lease on his beloved BMW, a car he boasted about as a symbol of his hard-earned success. That was $850 a month for 6 years. Jessica's luxury SUV, another $600 a month. I did the math, another $104,400. The numbers kept climbing, each file a testament to a generosity that had been twisted into an expectation. The private school tuition filled an entire drawer. The Oak Haven Preparatory Academy, a place with a Latin motto and a polo team. The annual bill was a staggering $38,000 for both children, for 12 years. I typed the numbers into my calculator, my fingers feeling heavy. $456,000 for an education they paraded as proof of their superior parenting. Then there were the miscellaneous expenses. The Riverwood Country Club membership, another $12,000 a year. The family vacations to Europe, Hawaii, the luxury ski resorts, all documented with cheerful photos on social media, never with a word of thanks to the man who funded them. The kitchen renovation, the emergency roof repair, the credit card bills I'd quietly paid off to keep their credit scores from tanking. I stopped counting the smaller things and just added a conservative estimate. At least another $150,000. I leaned back in my old leather chair, the final tally glowing on the calculator screen. $1,340,400. I had given them a fortune, not just in money, but in the dreams I had deferred for myself. The world cruise Helen and I had always talked about, the vintage sports car I'd wanted to restore, the quiet lakeside cabin I dreamed of building. All of it had been sacrificed on the altar of their comfort. I looked at my own bank statements, my modest retirement account, smaller than it should have been because I'd prioritized their mortgage over my own investments. I looked at the 15-year-old sedan I drove while Greg leased a new luxury vehicle every 3 years. The weight of it all settled on me, not with bitterness, but with a cold, hard clarity. The support structure had failed, not because it was weak, but because the load it was carrying had become rotten with entitlement. At 11 p.m., I picked up the phone. It was time to schedule some demolitions. Sunday morning felt different. The air in my house seemed clearer. The coffee tasted bolder. I spent the morning on the phone, a notebook and pen in front of me. Each call was a precise, calculated step. The first was to my bank. I need to cancel several recurring automatic transfers, I said to the customer service representative, my voice as calm and steady as if I were ordering lumber for a job site. I read off the account numbers for the mortgage, the car leases, the country club. Yes, sir, those have all been discontinued, the woman said, oblivious to the earthquake she was triggering. I made a neat check mark in my notebook. Next was the credit card company that held the card I'd given them for emergencies, which had somehow come to include designer bags and expensive dinners. Yes, I'd like to cancel this supplementary card immediately. Another check mark.
The private school's accounting department was last. I'm calling to inform you that I will no longer be responsible for the tuition payments for Samuel and Lillian Howard. There was a pause on the other end. I see, Mr. Bennett. The next payment is due in 5 days. Should I inform the parents? Yes, I said. You should. The final, most satisfying checkmark of all. The first call from Jessica came at 11:52 a.m. Dad, something strange is going on. The bank just called about the mortgage. They said the automatic payment was canceled. Her voice was laced with confusion, not yet panic. That's correct, I said calmly. I canceled it. A beat of silence. You... what? Why? Is this about what Greg said? Dad, it was a stupid joke. It stopped being a joke when he called me a loser at a table I paid for, in a house I pay for, after a meal bought with wine I brought. As of last night, my financial support has ended. But you can't just, she started, her voice rising. The mortgage, Dad. We'll lose the house. Then you and Greg will need to figure out how to pay for it, I said. And before she could argue further, I gently ended the call. The phone rang again almost immediately. I let it go to voicemail. Then a text from Greg arrived. Whatever game you're playing, it stops now. Call me. I deleted it without a reply. The rest of the day was a cascade. A call from the country club about their lapsed membership, an email from the BMW leasing company. By late afternoon, the panic had clearly set in. Jessica called again, this time sobbing. Dad, please, I don't understand. The school called. The credit card was declined at the grocery store. What are we supposed to do? You could start by preparing a family budget based on your actual income. It's a novel concept, I know, but surprisingly effective. The final call of the day came from Greg at 6 p.m. The bluster was gone, replaced by a strained, furious tone. You think this is funny? You're trying to destroy our family because your feelings got hurt? I'm not destroying anything, Greg, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I'm just stepping back to admire the life you've built all on your own. It seems the foundation isn't quite as solid as you thought. I hung up the phone, and for the first time in a very long time, I sat down and read a book, the silence of my house a peaceful balm. The storm had been unleashed, and now all I had to do was wait for the wreckage to wash ashore. For the next week, the dominoes continued to fall, each one landing with a more desperate thud. On Monday, Greg tried to play the big shot at his country club, only to have his card declined in front of his colleagues. My friend Bob, who is also a member, called to tell me about it. He tried to laugh it off, but he went beet red and left in a hurry. On Tuesday, the private school sent home a letter with Lily, a stark, formal notice of impending withdrawal if the outstanding balance of $9,000 wasn't paid by the end of the week. Jessica called me hysterical. They're going to kick the kids out, Dad, in the middle of the semester? Think of their friends, their stability. I have been thinking of their stability for 15 years, Jessica. Perhaps it's time you and their father did the same. The real fireworks happened on Thursday. Greg's new BMW was ceremoniously towed from the visitor parking lot at his office. Apparently, the leasing company didn't mess around. The humiliation was, from what I heard, spectacular. His attempt to portray himself as a titan of industry took a significant hit when his luxury car was being hauled away in front of the entire company. That evening, they showed up at my house unannounced. Greg pushed past me the moment I opened the door, his face a mask of fury. Jessica followed, her eyes red and puffy. This ends now, Greg spat, pacing my living room like a caged tiger. You will call the bank, the school, the car company, and you will fix this. You have a moral obligation to this family. A moral obligation? I asked, raising an eyebrow. That's a fascinating interpretation. I'd argue my obligation, which was to help you become stable, was fulfilled about a decade and over $1 million ago. Everything since has been a gift, and you don't get to demand gifts. I walked to my desk and pulled out the thick ledger where I'd tallied the numbers. I laid it on the coffee table. $1,340,400, I said, tapping the final number. Let's break it down, shall we? Mortgages, cars, tuition, vacations, club memberships. Jessica sank onto the couch, her face ashen, as I began to list the specifics. Greg's bluster finally sputtered out. He stared at the ledger as if it were a venomous snake. That's not possible, he stammered. The numbers don't lie, Greg. You wanted to know what it's like to be a provider. Now's your chance to find out. It was then that Greg decided to change tactics. If he couldn't bully me, he would try to shame me. The next day, he began his campaign.
He told his friends at the bar that his senile old father-in-law had suddenly gone crazy, cutting off his own grandchildren out of spite. He painted a picture of himself as the victim, a hard-working man being punished by a bitter retiree.
Jessica, in turn, called her aunts and cousins, weeping about how her father had abandoned them in their time of need. "He's punishing the children because he's angry with Greg," she cried. "What would Mom think?" The phone calls started coming in. My sister-in-law, Janet, called, her voice dripping with disapproval. "Michael, I'm shocked. How could you do this to your own daughter, to Helen's daughter?" "Janet," I said calmly, "did Jessica happen to mention the $1.3 million I've given them since Helen died?" There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. What? "I have the documents for every penny," I said. "Perhaps you should ask her about that before you pass judgment." The narrative began to shift. The truth, as it often does, started to leak out. My friend Bob from the country club corrected the story Greg was spinning. Bill, the car salesman who sold Greg the BMW, mentioned to a few people that it was an odd lease that he remembered me co-signing. The whispers in our small community began to change from poor Jessica and Greg to, "I wonder what the real story is." The turning point came when Jessica, in a moment of desperation, took a part-time job as a cashier at a high-end grocery store to make ends meet. One afternoon, one of her former country club friends, a woman she used to have lunch with, came through her line. The woman stared at Jessica's name tag and the humble uniform, a look of complete shock on her face. "Jessica, what on earth are you doing working here?" The humiliation was a bucket of cold water. That night, for the first time, Jessica called me, not with demands or tears, but with a single, quiet question. "Dad, can we talk? Really talk?" The conversation was long and difficult. For the first time, there were no excuses, no deflections. There was just the raw, painful truth. They were broke. They had been living a complete lie. Their credit cards were maxed out, they had no savings, and the foreclosure notice on the house was due to be served any day. "What do you want from us, Dad?" she finally asked, her voice small. "I don't want anything from you, Jessica. I want something for you. I want you and your husband to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. I want my grandchildren to see parents who live with integrity, not entitlement. I want to be your father, not your bank." I laid out my terms. It wasn't about punishment, it was about restructuring. I would set up a trust to pay for the grandchildren's education and health care directly. I would pay for their extracurriculars, their soccer leagues and piano lessons. Their well-being was non-negotiable. "But," I said, my voice firm, "the house, the cars, the lifestyle, that is on you and Greg. You will sell the house. You will sell the luxury SUV. You will create a budget, and you will live within it. And you will both issue a public apology, not to me, but to the community and family you've been lying to." It was a bitter pill to swallow, but they were out of options. The next few months were a blur of harsh realities for them. They sold the house, moving into a modest rental townhouse on the other side of town. The fancy SUV was replaced with a reliable, used minivan. Greg had to trade in his pride for a sensible sedan. Jessica continued to work at the grocery store, slowly being promoted to a shift manager. The public apology came in the form of a letter they posted on their social media, a raw and honest admission of their financial dependency and their gratitude for the years of support I had given them. It was humbling for them, but it was also liberating. The lies were over. Slowly, a new family dynamic began to emerge. Our Sunday dinners, now held at my house, were no longer about what they could get from me, but about reconnecting. Greg, humbled by the experience, started asking me for advice, not about money, but about life. He talked about his job with a new perspective, focusing on providing for his family instead of just acquiring status symbols. Jessica, for her part, discovered a strength and competence in herself she never knew she had. She was proud of her job, proud of contributing to their household. The children were the real beneficiaries. They were happier in the smaller house with parents who were more present and less stressed about keeping up appearances. They learned the value of money, that things had to be earned, and they appreciated the things they had so much more. As for me, I finally booked that world cruise Helen and I had always dreamed of. I sent them postcards from Rome, from Sydney, from the fjords of Norway. I started restoring that vintage sports car in my garage. My life, which had been on hold for 15 years, was finally my own again. The lesson in all of this was a hard one. Sometimes, the most loving thing a parent can do is to stop helping. True support isn't about writing checks. It's about providing the tools for others to build their own solid foundations. My revenge on my son-in-law wasn't about seeing him fail. It was about forcing him to succeed on his own terms. I had taken away their crutches, and in doing so, I had taught them how to walk. And that, I realized, was the greatest structure I had ever designed. Thank you for listening to my story.